Welcome to this module on how addiction works. In this module, I want to talk a bit about how the mind processes addiction, also sometimes referred to as a compulsion. And I want to start with a quote from a book called The Heart of Addiction by Dr. Lance Dodies. And Dodies says, after many hundreds, maybe thousands of clients, that virtually every addictive act is preceded by a feeling of helplessness or powerlessness. Helplessness or powerlessness. This tells me that the person in that moment feels like they can't do anything, or perhaps they can't do anything else. They feel utterly powerless and utterly helpless in that moment. So how does this work? How would this be the way that addiction actually ends up unfolding? Well, let's have a look at a flowchart. In a normalized person, and that is a very strange term to use, because what is a normalized person? Okay, well, let's say, for example, that this is a person without any history of developmental trauma, who had fairly safe relationships with their parents and loved ones, and learned, in some ways to move through the world with a sense of vulnerability and self-care. There will be an incident. Let's say, for example, someone will cut in front of me in the traffic, or the boss sends a company-wide email but talking really badly about me in the email. Or let's say, for example, my sex life is dwindling and I need to really talk to my partner about that. As you can see, there's manage on the left-hand side, and so if I feel safe in the world, if I can be vulnerable and I don't have a sense of fear, I can go and take action. In the road rage example, I can be quite normalized about it and go, well, it was dangerous and I can be angry about it, but I don't have to overreact. This is another person's poor driving. It's not up to me. In the case with the boss that sends out the company-wide email that's shaming me, I can get up from my desk, go knock on the door and say, I need to let you know that email was incredibly hurtful, and I won't tolerate being spoken to in that way and embarrassed in a public forum. It's not acceptable to me. With the relationship with my partner and our dwindling sex life, I have to go up to them, and it's a very hard conversation to have, not to say, well, I feel anxious to even talk about this, but can we have a chat about our sex life? I feel like we need to do something about it. It's important to me. So that would be to manage. Of course, the other thing to do is to do nothing, which is also possible, and something that we might do for a while. But what happens if I have a history of developmental trauma? Things change up quite a lot, because in some ways I'm going to have a history of not knowing how to interact with the world in a way that is most effective and quite functional. There's going to be a disordered way that I interact with the world and how I get feedback based on developmental trauma. Developmental trauma and complex PTSD and PTSD are covered in additional modules, which I hope you will watch. But if I come from that background, if I have developmental trauma, or I have a history of not being able to lean into people, in other words, being able to be vulnerable and to tell them what's going on for me, and if I don't get positive feedback, or at least feedback that is helpful or reflective from those people, I'm probably not going to trust the world very much. I'm not going to know that I can lean into the world when I have issues. I'm probably going to be quite afraid of the world, even though I might not seem afraid. So I don't manage. And strangely enough, the brain doesn't like doing nothing. In human psychology, we want to offset these feelings. So the feelings come up. So in this example with the road rage, the person dives in front of me and suddenly I feel this roar of anger. Thousands and thousands of hours of unprocessed anger just bubble to the surface, hence road rage. In the example with the boss that sends the company-wide email, I get this email and the blood drains from my body as I read through, and I see how I'm being shamed in a public forum. And with the example with my partner, maybe I fear abandonment, maybe I fear being rejected. Maybe I'm in the relationship for certain reasons and I feel like I can't leave the relationship, so I can't have that conversation. And in all three of these scenarios, particularly in the second and third, I start feeling incredibly helpless, because I want to take action. I want to go up and tell the boss, what an awful thing he said and how horrible he's been and how it's affected me. But maybe I don't feel like I have the right. Maybe I don't feel like it's my place. Maybe I feel too ashamed. With my partner, I want to have that conversation around a dwindling sex life, but maybe I feel just too scared to. So I sit there, and my world gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually the mind tries to reassert personal power and control. And to do that, it finds a target, a safe target, where it can displace on, where there can be relief. And what could be more safe, more reliable, more dependable, less uncertain than an object, like alcohol, like drugs, pharmaceuticals, illicit drugs, like processes like gambling. This is really important because I don't want to interact with people. They make me feel unsafe. Or maybe I don't feel like my needs will be met or I'll be reflected to properly. So I take all those feelings of hopelessness and powerlessness, because I really want to take action in this way, and I redirect them in some way onto a target that I can completely control. This is why addiction is a compulsion, but its technique is actually a displacement. The displacement is displacing the hopelessness that was created by the fact that I couldn't have that conversation, that I felt self-inhibited, that I couldn't go to the boss and tell him how I felt, that I couldn't go to my partner and discuss it. The fact that I couldn't do that is what wells up this powerlessness and this helplessness. And I displace it. The anxiety gets displaced. If we look another way at a stress cycle for human beings, as we go through the day, we say our everyday activities, we carry on without developmental trauma, so without a history of developmental trauma. We perceive a triggering condition, so that letter that came in, the email, or a conversation that I want to have, which provokes anxiety. Then what I do is I seek closeness or safety from a partner, or from any other significant other. I seek that proximity. I seek a way to move through it. I seek a way to offload, to try and talk about this, to let people know how I'm feeling, so I can let that feeling go. Most importantly, I need to get a positive response from the other. And when I do, the anxiety is reduced or eliminated. And this is the normal stress cycle throughout the day. But what happens with addiction is something a little more unfortunate. I don't feel like I can trust people. I can't lean into them. I've been taught in the past that people are lousy. They don't always live up to the things that they say they'll do. They're untrustworthy. Maybe I don't believe people have good intentions. Maybe I just don't believe like I have a right to talk to someone. Maybe I don't have the right to complain, which means my world gets very, very small. And so I don't lean into someone else at that moment. At that moment, I choose to redirect that sense of powerlessness onto a safe and reliable target. And how much more reliable a bottle of wine? I know where to get it. I know what it looks like. I know what it tastes like. I know the path I need to go to get it. I know who I need to speak to. I know how much it costs. Utterly, utterly repeatable and reliable. Human beings are not that clear. They're ambiguous. They're contradictory. They disappoint us. That's why it is such a compelling disorder. Because I take the energy that I would really want to put towards the problem and I redirect it onto a target that is safe, that I'm able to control ultimately. And when we look for this with clients, and indeed for your own reflection or for those around you, someone might be struggling with addiction, look for what Dr. Lance Doty calls the key moment. The key moment is that moment where I flick a switch, when the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, I finally take back personal power and control by redirecting it onto that object. As I'm sitting there and I'm reading this email from the boss, I know on some fundamental level I'm not going to get up and go speak to them. I close my eyes, I throw the switch, I'll go to the bar. And then I feel better. And clients feel better at the key moment or just shortly thereafter when they decide they're going to use or go and drink. They don't feel better when they're drinking. Of course, that may happen because of the effects of alcohol, for example. But at that moment where I'm reading that letter and I'm getting so enraged and my world's feeling very small and powerless, the moment I flick that switch, personal power and control comes back in some way. Of course, the target is not great because the target is a bottle which can't change anything. And what I really want to be able to do is redirect my energy and deal with the problem directly and head on. But I can't because of the self-inhibition, because I don't feel like I can, or because I've learned in the past this will not go well. So compelling. Having an object over which you have complete control is an external form of that need to re-establish power against that helplessness. Ha! Wine! It's like all of those feelings of feeling so helpless are offset when I can finally, there's the target, there's the object, sorted, I know what I'm going to do. I've regained some level of personal power and control. And it's crippling because I lean into that relationship and I continue to do it. And the more I lean into that relationship with the booze or with the drug or whatever it is, of course, the less I will even try and lean back into the solution or the problem, or to try and solve that action, whether it was the email from the boss or the conversation around sex with my partner. I'm going to automatically in the future, and this is why it's called addiction, because it looked so automatic. I just keep on leaning into the object, into the object, into the object, and no work is done here. And that's why some authors have spoken about addiction as a disorder of connection, because I've stopped connecting with people and I've started connecting with inanimate objects that make me feel a certain way. There's a second part in Dodie's book, The Heart of Addiction, which is rage. And this is also very important, because if I sat there and I was reading this email which was publicly shaming me, and I exhaled, I flicked the switch and thought, screw it, I'm going to go for a drink. Why would I then have 10 or 12 beers at the bar and not just one and then go home? Why continue using? And the reason for this is the amount of unprocessed energy around that topic. So let's say the boss had been going at me for a month, 2 months, 6 months, and this was just the final straw, man. Flick the switch, all that unprocessed rage, all that unprocessed energy goes into the target. And that's why it's not just 1 or 2, but a 2-day bender. We have to ask questions around relationships when it comes to addiction, because addiction is a systemic disorder. What we mean by that is that the system helps create the disorder. It's not just the individual. Sure, the individual has a response that becomes an addiction, a compulsion that becomes an addiction, but the system is still there keeping everything going. And that's why relationships are so important. So we need to ask ourselves, why do we compulsively turn to this object, this significant object that we've chosen, heroin, cocaine, alcohol? What is going on in the other relationships? In my marriage, with my children, with my parents, boyfriend, girlfriend, at work, my colleagues, my friends, what is going on in those relationships? So it's quite important that we do a little bit of an inventory, and we try and note the quality and the nature of our most significant relationships. The quality, what is the quality of the relationship? Is it an intimate relationship? Can we be vulnerable with each other? Can we be honest? Can we be clear? Are there passive-aggressive overtones? Do we not speak clearly with each other? Are there mixed messages? Or is it open? Is it transparent? Is it safe? Is it trusting? Is it reliable? Quality. The nature of a relationship is this relationship ordered? Are you really my father in this scenario, or do you treat me like a buddy? Are you really my son, or are you talking to me like a parent? We need to make sure that relationships are ordered. If I have a relationship with a spouse, do they talk to me like a parent, or do they talk to me like an adult? This is what I mean. So we look at this, and I invite you to go through each of these and notice out of 5 the quality. Give it a mark. Literally go through all the people that are close to you. Give it a mark out of 5, 1 to 5, and just have a look, step back and have a look at it afterwards. What is the quality of those relationships and the nature? Is it ordered, or my spouse keeps on treating me like a child, so I feel like the child in the relationship? Go through the list and do a bit of homework if you don't mind. it's very eye-opening because we get so blindsided by addiction. We get so focused, and there's another video on that with the myths of addiction. We get so focused on the object, which is just a symptom really. If I keep on displacing my energy onto a target like booze, that's a symptom. That's a red flag. That tells me that something else is wrong in the system. And we are so obsessed with that, and have been in the past with addiction clinical medicine, that we're so fixated on the object. Just say no, just try and control your cravings. We need to look at the system that is encouraging this displacement. Sometimes we also need to note the absence of relational possibilities or benefits or needs. So if I go through that list, what was missing? Did I have an absent father, an absent mother? Do I have an absent spouse? It's very important to also see what I'm not getting from those relationships. For example, what do I expect from a marital relationship? Trust, support, comfort, nurturance. Am I getting those things, or is there an absence thereof? Be quite critical of your relationships. It will really help you understand the system that you're in. Because the solution to addiction is the connections. It's not just saying no. Something else important to consider: what is it, the target that I've chosen unconsciously? This is not a conscious choice. People don't choose to become addicted to things because it's a good idea. I've made an unconscious connection with this object because I find it reliable, unlike my relationships. But it's fulfilling something else, not just that offsetting of powerlessness. There's something else it's doing, and I'll give you an example. Adolescent, 17 years old, still at home, has gone through puberty, body's changed, maybe I have identity issues, but maybe my parents are very authoritarian, disciplinarians, maybe they keep me on a short leash. I'm 17, my world feels very, 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 very small. How much personal power and autonomy do teenagers really have? Especially early adults or late adolescents. And then you find that adolescent flicking a switch and becoming dependent on cannabis. And then someone would say, well, why cannabis? Why not alcohol? Why not mandrax? Why cannabis? Of course, the answer would be, well, this is what they were introduced to at school, and everyone was doing it and kids do it. But there's a reason why that target was chosen. Of course, for the switch. So I can offset this feeling. Maybe my mom came in and screamed at me and told me I'm worthless. So I run away, flick a switch, and I go, screw you, and then I reassert that personal power on the cannabis. But the cannabis is doing something else. Ingesting cannabis means I speed up and I slow down time at the same time. And if I'm 17, I'm probably dying to get out of home. So what I'd really like to do is time travel. And cannabis in some ways is kind of a time-traveling psychoactive substance. Why would someone choose champagne as their go-to flick switch when they want to feel better, and not red wine, or beer and not whiskey? There's a really important reason, and if you do your therapeutic work, it's really important that you look at why that object. Why that object? So in this penultimate slide, I want to point out that this conversation, this interaction can be had with ourselves that makes us feel helpless and powerless. We can literally be sitting on our own and have thoughts around how hopeless and powerless we feel. Severe, unrealistic self-criticism is a very common precipitant as well to addictive behavior. It means I can be sitting all on my own. Maybe my wife or my partner's just left me. It wasn't the interaction with them that made me flick the switch, but maybe I'm sitting there and I'm hurting on myself, and I actually in some ways create a disconnection with myself, and I flick the switch too. So we find that inner critic work and self-esteem work is so important to restoration from addiction. So just to recap, what we really want to do with addiction is make sure that a client or a person can manage the incidents that come along. They can manage the self-talk. They can manage the relationships that they have. They can be free to express if they have needs. They can speak to their loved ones. And we'll cover more of these in subsequent modules, particularly the skills modules. But we need to figure out a way where we don't need to feel like the world is so small that we have no option but to reassert power and redirect it onto a bottle of wine.